There are a lot of players in DSxHE. It spans academia, the public sector, the private sector, policymakers, funders, public media, the third sector, and beyond. Next slide, please. And the data diversity theme within DSxHE started in autumn of last year. And broadly, our aim is to empower researchers, clinicians, and patient advocates with the tools, evidence, and skills they need to promote diversity throughout the research lifecycle so that advances in biomedical research benefit everyone. And there's three pillars. There are three pillars supporting the overarching aim: education, developing tools and resources, and also generating some practical evidence. And we are funded, the data diversity theme, by our partners at Cancer Research UK, and Brio Lehman, Associate Professor at UCL, and myself are the academic co-leads for the theme. Next slide, please. And in order to deliver our aim, since the spring of this year, we've been developing and co-hosting a series of partner events that kind of cycle, they're all kind of targeted at researchers for each stage of the research life cycle. We've had an event with PEDRI looking at public engagement and involvement. We had an event with HDR UK looking at data collation. And today with READI, we're going to be talking about inclusive research design, particularly underserved and under-researched populations. And for each event, we have three main objectives. What we want to do is highlight where existing resources are. We want to discuss and explore the ongoing challenges and identify any needs for future action. DSxHE is also a community of volunteers, and these events act as a springboard for volunteer-led co-design of any new resources to be developed to cover the gaps that we've identified during the events. Next slide, please. And just to give you a sense of who you are, so these were questions that we asked you when you registered for the event, and we asked you why you were signing up for the event. And roughly 2/3 of you want to improve your own work and research. Another two-thirds want to hear about examples from others. You want to understand the challenges, and you want to learn about tools, resources, and data sets in this area. And you want to connect with other people. And we're hoping that today's event is going to allow you to do all of the above, if not a whole lot more. So that's all that I wanted to say. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the READI team, and Salma is going to speak first on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to talk about the READI project. So are we ready? READI is about creating an inclusive European clinical research ecosystem. Is an IHI-funded public-private partnership advancing inclusive and patient-centered clinical research in Europe. Next slide, please. So here it is very important to understand, are clinical studies in Europe fully representative? Is it possible to create a more inclusive and representative ecosystem that would reflect the population ultimately receiving the therapy? So meaning how we can create or make clinical research more inclusive so that it better reflects the real world population. So you can see that Europe is beautifully messy, bringing together different languages, cultures, different genetics, environment. But when we talk about the clinical research, it does not always reflect this reality, and some groups remain underrepresented. So READI aims to change this by putting patients in the driver's seat as active partners, not an afterthought. By bringing key stakeholders together, READI is building a more inclusive clinical research ecosystem across Europe. And to build this, we have a huge team, 80 organizations across 18 countries, about 69 million budget, and over 72 months. Now, if you have organized to pick a restaurant with 18 friends, you would know how hard it is to make a decision. But here, this fantastic team is going to move together with motivation, enthusiasm, and we'll be working together for 6 years to have a change in the ecosystem. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the objectives of the READI project, next slide. So the goal is very simple. We need to build a more representative and inclusive clinical research ecosystem, breaking down the barriers to participation. We need to make more awareness of inclusive clinical research, improve inclusion of US-UR population, and make clinical studies more accessible and representative. Now, clinical research shouldn't be a group photo where half of the people are missing. Our goal is to open the door wider, include more voices, and build studies that represent the people who actually use the treatment. Next slide, please. So what is READI doing? There are two things here. Something we are doing inside the consortium and something we are doing outside the consortium. So let's see what we are doing inside. Next slide, please. So inside the consortium, READI is changing how the research works. How? So by putting patient organization across READI work packages, READI training sessions to move from plans on paper to day-to-day practice, having clear patient involvement action plans for almost every work package, and focus on avoiding tokenism and strengthening the real influence. So let's see what we are doing outside. Next slide, please. So when we are talking about the outside, for outside, the main objective of the READI consortium is to build trust and to have reach to the communities. Now, imagine that trust is like a plant. It needs time, care, and attention to grow. So READI is working with communities to build trust, remove barriers, and make clinical studies easier for everyone to join. Next slide, please. So READI is laying foundations for a lasting change. So how we are doing that? We are turning ideas into actions. We are creating practical tools. It's just not a theory, but practically we are creating tools, training materials with patients who are having a lived experience, and setting clear ways to measure inclusion. Because if we cannot measure something, we cannot improve it. And improving clinical research is our goal. Next slide, please. So what is going to be the impact of this fantastic project? Next slide, please. So clearly driving inclusive clinical research across Europe. So we are going to have advancement in US-UR representativeness, better recruitment and retention, access to medical innovations for everybody, awareness about inclusivity in clinical research. The most important will be trust in the clinical research, and finally, having research outcomes that actually reflect patient needs. Next slide, please. So we are also trying to have, trying to create a patient-centered framework that would allow us to access for underrepresented and underserved populations, and finally, better health care outcomes for all communities across Europe. Next slide, please. So why must patient voices shape European clinical research? Here is the key message. Patient voices are not optional. They are essential. Yes, I repeat, patient voices are not optional, they are essential. When patient help shaping research, studies become more inclusive, more ethical, and more useful in real life. So patients should be involved from the very beginning and continuously, not just the end as a tick box. They should have a real influence over the design and the conduct. People with conditions are actually the real experts, and they should not be considered as an afterthought. Next slide, please. So when we are talking about the community, this is something that's considered as the heart of the READI project. For READI, communities are not just a checkbox. They are our partners. We are not designing solutions for people. We are creating them together. And that's how we are going to build a long-lasting change. Next slide, please. So how many work packages are there in the READI? Let's see on the next slide. If I will take you to all the work packages individually, I'm afraid my colleagues will not have enough time to talk about other interesting parts of the project. So I can give you an idea very quickly that READI is built upon 10 work packages, and there are 3 important pillars. So where pillar 1 is covering work package 1, 2, 3, 4. So work package 1, understanding and characterizing USUR population and providing guidance to enhance inclusion in European clinical studies. Then work package 2 is going to develop a digital platform. Work package 3, protocol design and clinical operations. Work package 3 is going to provide a fantastic toolbox for designing clinical studies and for helping everybody to prepare good protocols. Work package 4, training and virtual learning platforms. And pillar 2, community, connectivity, and capacity. So work package 5 and work package 6 are going to work on clinical size, capacity building, and community connectivity. And work package 7 is very important, that is going to have a demonstration in clinical and non-clinical use cases. So finally, work package 8, which is really important, talking about the ethical dimensions, and work package 9 is about the communication and the sustainability. And then work package 10 is doing a fantastic job doing the coordination and the project management of one of the biggest consortium in Europe, but doing it in a very nice way, in a very organized way. So can we move to the next slide, please? So you see the expertise behind the READI project are coming from different public-private organizations. And I really feel proud to be the part of this fantastic project. And next slide, please. So if you have clearly understood everything about the READI project, please follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. I stop here. And the floor goes to Zoe now, no?
Thank you very much, Salma. After this excellent, really remarkable presentation of Salma, I will go through another journey and focus actually on work package 1, which is about the challenges and the opportunities in defining underserved and underrepresented populations in Europe. And of course, I come from the academic field, actually from an underrepresented country. From Cyprus. I'm a professor in pediatrics and epidemiology. And when it comes to READI, I am co-leading, I have the pleasure actually to co-lead work package 1, which is focused on this specific item. And I will provide you just a very crude summary of the work package 1 READI objectives, which is reflected actually in 5 tasks, as you can see also on the slide. One very important, let's say, task is to perform mapping of the European population characteristics and to generate an agreed conceptualized and, of course, also contemporary understanding of US and UR population for clinical studies. The second one is to generate a set of harmonized and standardized descriptors to guide inclusion of US UR population in clinical research. Of course, to identify and analyze some key barriers, but also some opportunities when it comes to US UR populations. Number 4 is to inform the regulatory, but also the HTA policy landscape in Europe on strategies to enhance representativeness in clinical studies. And this is a very important task that is coordinated by NICE UK. And last but not least is to enable continuous monitoring and dynamic evaluation of US-UR population over time, because of course this is not a static situation. The whole population is dynamic, and you can understand why over the years. Understanding US-UR population is a critical step for improving inclusion and representativeness in clinical studies globally, but also in Europe. But we can ask ourselves, how are underserved and underrepresented population understood? Do we really understand in depth what we mean or what we define under the terms US and UR populations? And there is actually an inclusion paradox, if you think about it, because without proper and careful understanding of these two terms, there is an increased risk of reinforcing stigma and overlooking actually those who remain invisible. And thus, what are we doing? We are reinforcing exclusion. So it's a very important topic that needs clear methodological, but also ethical approach and questions on how to conceptualize, but also on how to operationalize US-UR populations. And of course, we don't have the answers yet. As Salma mentioned, this is a long journey that started 1.5 years ago, and we have a lot, 6 years in total, in order to, let's say, try to improve the ecosystem and also try to improve our understanding, especially when it comes to Europe. And of course, the situation, as we all know, is that currently or during the last years, there has been an increased focus on an increased interest in underserved and underrepresented populations. And there has been also a range of regulations and policies, mainly to recommend greater inclusion. But we do know, on the other hand, that persistent gaps, especially in the implementation phase, do remain. And simultaneously, there has been several discussions. There has been research and literature when it comes to US and UR population. And sometimes we are using these words, if you think about it, as they are self-evident. And often they are defined through broad socio-demographic markers. So why I'm saying that is because we need to be very careful when we use the terms US-UR population and what they represent and how we really understand these two terms. Because otherwise, this will not actually reflect who is truly US-UR within the ecosystem of Europe. So, what does US-UR actually mean? The question needs to be first answered. And in order to do so, within READI consortium, and especially within Work Package 1, we tried to use several approaches in order to better understand it. And one of them was a systematic narrative review coordinated actually by Karina Piedens and her group from the VU team in Amsterdam. So what have we learned, at least from the initial step of the literature review? So despite the growing policy attention both in the US and of course also in Europe, there is still no shared understanding of what constitutes underserved or underrepresented population. Policies, of course, such as the NIH Revitalization Act and the EU Trial Regulation have advanced for sure inclusion, yet most definitions remain limited to demographic categories. And of course, as we said, this narrow framing risks overlooking invisible groups and reinforcing unintentionally stigma. So through the key, let's say, insights from the literature review that has been made last year, we have focused finally on 62 publications that are the most recently published studies. And what we found out is that they did not provide explicit definitions of USUR populations. And in these studies, when definitions were offered, they tended to be very descriptive, listing groups rather than engaging conceptually with what exclusion means. And in one of the more, let's say, comprehensive approaches, one study that was conducted by Wickham et al., they identified actually 3 dimensions of inclusion in order to, in a way, to coordinate this work into numerical, for example, underrepresentation in samples, systemic, structural barriers in design, and barrier-related dimensions of inclusion, which could be practically cultural or psychological challenges. And the findings when it comes to terms and the definitions from the literature review, as you can see, there is actually a lack of coherent and consistently applied conceptual understanding of USUR population. And even when using terms such as underserved and underrepresented, the precise meaning is not explored. And when it comes to descriptors, these, let's say, standardized variables, they are often used in place of stable definitions. And on the figure, you can see the frequency of terms that appeared in the literature. Of course, underserved and underrepresented were the most frequent one, but you can see also other terms that were used. And okay, I will go to this slide, which is a suggestion. And of course, I need to emphasize that the literature review and these key, let's say, insights, it's only one part of the task in order to, with the aim to better understand USUR population, because following this work, there has been additionally let's say, analysis of the population in Europe through national registries, like, for example, Eurostat, and also comparison analysis of previous clinical trials from READI partners, where we did analyze and saw the characteristics of the population in Europe. Of course, this is something that we cannot provide to you. It's not yet publicly available. That's why today we focus on the literature review insights. And after a lot of discussions and following now a Delphi study that is currently conducted, one of the suggestions was if we can proceed maybe with a layered framework when it comes to understanding or using USUR populations focused on the measurability and the data availability. So we have stratified, as you can see, 3 layers or 3 tiers, starting with those descriptors or variables that are routinely collected and they are more or less harmonized, as, for example, age and sex. Secondly, inconsistently collected variables such as socioeconomic status, reflecting education, employment, and maybe these are not consistently defined, but in a way, there are some data where we can improve and focus on. And third, the undercaptured structural and contextual factors, like, for example, digital access, language, and other factors that we see as undercaptured. So the way forward, we do understand that there is a persistent gap in both conceptual clarity and practical guidance. And with a proper understanding, or without, let's say, a proper understanding, there is an existing risk of reinforcement of exclusion and stigma. So we do need practical guidance and thus concrete definitions to improve inclusion. And we need context and time-bound specificity for meaningful exclusion so that we can avoid exclusion. A summary, I would say, of challenges in conceptualizing inclusion and underrepresentation from the current work. And this is just a snapshot. Actually, these are the major, let's say, challenges that we have depicted. Number one is inconsistent use of descriptors. So terms such as, for example, race and ethnicity and sex and gender are often used interchangeably without varying meanings across studies. And their inconsistent and isolated application, of course, limits comparability and reduces analytical value in understanding underrepresentation. Number two, limited integration of intersectionality. So most studies do not adequately account on how multiple dimensions of inclusion interact and compound, leading to an incomplete understanding of inequities. And number three, narrow framing of inclusion. So inclusion is often measured as representation rather than meaningful engagement, restricting progress towards a more participatory approach and structural change, as also Salma mentioned. And my last, let's say, slide is about the barriers. So within Work Package 1, but not only in Work Package 1, we are trying to better understand and deepen our knowledge when it comes to the barriers for underserved and underrepresented population. And here is a work that has been done by Task 1.3, analyzing, first of all, again, the literature, and then moving forward with Delphi studies, engaging a variety of stakeholders within Europe. And this is a snapshot showing 6 categories that we have found, as you can see also on the slide. Number one is access, logistics, and practicalities. Number two is individual, community, and health-related perceptions. Number three is institutional capacity and practices. The next one is legal, regulatory, and administrative barriers. And last but not least is trust, privacy, and ethics. And this is something that we can discuss eventually also in the following minutes. And as it was mentioned from the beginning, one of our, let's say, discussions would be to split into a breakout session. And we have some key questions that we would like to discuss and get your feedback. I will just tell you the 2 questions that we need to further discuss. Number one is, what would you consider to be the key variables that should be routinely collected in any clinical study to address data diversity, and what steps can be taken to address incomplete data capture relevant to inclusion in both trials and population datasets? And with that, for now, please, I will stop sharing the slides, and I will give the floor to the team.
Thank you, Zoe. That was great. And thank you, Salma, as well. Just before we go into the breakouts, there's a couple of interesting questions that have come out in the chat. And I just wonder whether maybe we could just spend a couple of minutes talking about them. So Ariane asks, how do you plan to proceed in countries such as France, where the collection of sensitive personal data, for example, ethnicity, is not allowed?
A great question. So we have
Sorry,
discussed.
can I just say your microphone, if it's there, it's sounding a little muted. You might.
Okay. Is it better now?
That's much better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Apologies for that.
Okay.
Actually, there has been several discussions with regards to sensitive data, and actually the different landscape when it comes to the European countries, especially for variables like ethnicity. And we will see it eventually, and we can discuss it also during the breakout session for specific, let's say, descriptors, including ethnicity. Of course, we need to respect and adapt to the national regulations, culture, etc. But our primary aim is, first of all, to better understand Europe-wide what is the situation out there, to suggest what can be, let's say, some standardized descriptors. And this is the reason why we prioritized and we suggested, let's say, the tier approach. And then the next step, or simultaneously, we will see times-wise, we need to discuss at the country level how this adaptation will be implemented.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ariane, for acknowledging the answer as well. Salma has very helpfully put a lot of links into the chat about how you can follow READI, and DSxHE will put together a summary of all of those links, and we'll circulate them to everyone who's registered. So you'll be able to, so don't worry about picking them up now. And also Matt Tata from Cancer Research UK has also very helpfully put in a link to the message framework, which is about sex versus gender. And we have, shameless plug by DSxHE, we have a partner event with Message planned for the autumn. Okay, so I think I'm going to hand over to Charlotte to put us into our breakout rooms. It's just coming up to 3:05. Could the registered participants get a copy of the presentations? Bruno, Zoe?
Sorry, Dorel, can you just repeat your question?
They're asking, people are asking if they can have a copy of the presentation.
Yes, of course. I think Bruno, we don't, and Salma will not have an issue distributing. This is publicly available, what we have embedded.
Yeah, I think maybe we can check.
The answer to that, I think, is yes.
Yeah, I think that we should check with the just our communication colleagues, because she was supposed to be here, but she could not join. But I don't think that's an issue.
So we'll look into it, and if we can, then we will.
Yeah, may I just build maybe on one of the important, I would say, intent of READI connected to the question about collection of data. Is it allowed, or is the framework allowing to connect certain data? What we intend to bring is a very clear rationale behind what to do when, including eventually what do we want to achieve with the recommendation that will come out of READI. And one aspect is really to say if there is a scientific rationale that connect for a certain condition, that certain aspect of population do matter, then we will certainly end up with making very strong recommendations. And just sharing the personal experience that we have in France is that when you, in your protocol or in your application to ethics committee, justify why in this condition you believe that ethnicity is an important aspect, because there is evidence that I don't know, prevalence or response may be different. This is accepted and in line with the legal framework in France. So this is what READI can also enable to maybe elevate and make it, formally, what is the way forward from a scientific and ethical standpoint to move forward in a complex European regulatory landscape. But there are definitely some ways forward.
Great, thanks, Bruno. Okay. So, Charlotte, do you want to do the magic thing and put us into? Are we all back in the room?
We certainly should be.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. So we had a great discussion in our breakout room, and I'm just going to summarize broadly the variables that we kind of thought should be collected, reported. And they were in no particular order. Comorbidity, lifestyle factors such as smoking, alcohol consumption, sex and gender, neurodiversity, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and age. We had a discussion about whether some of this should be mandatory in order to be able to get, particularly in the drug discovery space, about whether that could then be mandatory in order to fulfill FDA, EMA approvals. And we also had a sort of little discussion about distinguishing between studies that are trying to look at the associations between some of these factors and particular disease outcomes, and the difference between that and designing a trial where you want the study population to be representative of the people who have the disease of interest. So that was that. And then we had some useful links put into the chat, which I'm hoping, Charlotte, you'll be able to retrieve, that we could also send out with. Is that possible?
I have no idea if I can get them from the breakout room. So if you shared a useful link, would you mind resharing the main?
They largely came from Matt Tarter. So
Matt, if you could send me those links, that would be phenomenal.
We'll incorporate them into the summary that we send out. Thanks, Matt. And I'll just and is there anything that anybody from our breakout room, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Bruno, anything to add?
No, I think it was a very constructive and interesting discussion. I think that we had a little discussion on the potential future of how information could be collected by how people express some of how they define themselves, and then analytically extract some categories or some insights that come from this.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to hand over to Brio now to talk about the other group. Thanks, Brio.
Awesome. Yeah. So our discussion, we didn't end up talking so much about specific variables, but we still had a very, very interesting discussion. And a theme that kept on coming up is the idea of diversity being context specific. And so the variables that you might want to collect will vary depending on which populations you're aiming to serve. And one thing that we spoke about was, for example, that the variables that one might want to collect might vary, it might differ across different therapeutic areas. And so whilst there might be kind of an overarching framework across all studies, these might need to be specialized within different therapeutic areas. And so we had a little bit of a discussion around, okay, well, what would that framework need to look like in order to kind of come to some consensus across different therapeutic areas? Then the other point that was the question that was discussed was around the difficulty in harmonizing. And so difficulty in harmonizing variables across countries and how the same variable might mean different things. You might have different categorizations, which mean different things across different geographies. So ethnicity being the case in point. And so we had a discussion about maybe at like an EU level, again, we could have an overarching framework, which then could be specialized at the different national level. And whilst this might not be ideal, like ideally you would have harmonization across all countries, that might not actually be practically possible. But at least having some sort of framework in place might be better than the current practice. So that was kind of an interesting discussion as well. I think those are kind of the two main themes, but Zoe, maybe you might add anything that I've forgotten.
Practically, you covered me. Brew, maybe one key point that was mentioned was about some tips from experience from people that have already worked with US-Europe population on how to promptly engage this population. And there were so many nice ideas. And of course, we know them, but it's nice to hear them also from people that work with communities, like to ask them what are their needs, not starting with the questions from our side. So it's very important to keep in mind the communities and to reach out, respect them, adapt, and to promptly engage. And the key word was trust once again. I think rather than that, there has been a very nice discussion, but this is, let's say, the key points for now. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brio. Thank you, Zoe. So for the next bit, I'm going to hand over to Bruno, who's going to give the final talk, and then we'll wrap up after that. So Bruno, over to you.
Bruno, I will share the slide deck. I don't know if it's visible. Bruno, you are muted. Sorry.
It's visible, but it's not in slideshow mode.
Okay, because it's
yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
It's in it's in presenter view, but I think that's okay.
Hold on a second. Both Bruno and Zoe, you're both sharing your screen.
Okay, so I'm going to stop. Sorry, I created a mess. So let me just stop, and Zoe, I'll let you share.
Excellent.
There we go.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. So the last part of our meeting is really around sharing with you practically what READI intends to recommend and apply to help increase the design and the conduct of our studies so that eventually we can make them more representative and more reflective of the unserved population. So moving to the next slide, we have a whole work package that is dedicated to that, which is, in addition and beyond the definition, really understand what exists today, what are the existing tools, resources, what are the key gaps, and have a systematic approach of the strengths of these different possibilities, and make some recommendations and put them available in a toolbox so that eventually we can help the people who want to conduct clinical trials to think systematically about certain aspects, but also to leverage some existing free resources. And we aim to have also some partnerships with some providers. Last but not least, there are lots of sometimes great ideas that we can, I will share a bit more on that, but they do not all necessarily work or work equally in every situation. So it's really having this capacity to understand how to monitor and evaluate, and then further refine the way that we can have some tools. So before I give my presentation, we would like to ask you one question, which I think will be using another system, which is around when we are planning a trial. In your experience, at what stage of the trial planning does inclusive design typically first get discussed? So not where you would like it to be, but in your experience, what is happening now? Is it at the protocol design? Is it at the site selection? Is it later in recruitment and so on? So you have time to respond.
Can I stop sharing or is it okay?
It's okay as it is now, Zoe.
Nice.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I think that's great to get started. I think I'm very pleased to see that actually there is a significant number of participants who have the experience that it's at the initial stage of protocol design that that this is happening. So if we go back to the presentation, the way that we have structured in READI, if we go to the next slide, this approach towards protocol design and conducting the study is basically with splitting in 4 simple questions, which is who should be in a given study? So how do we say for this specific study, what are the recommendations to say it would be important to focus on this population? The second is really to make it clear around what does exist and what is have an evaluation, a repertory, and really analysis of the tools which already exist, the tool which works, and then make them available, potentially identify the gaps and develop some missing ones, and have a framework to then enable to evaluate, eventually do the tool work, but also eventually do the study deliver what they are expected to do and as defined at the design stage. So moving on to the next slide, we'll go a little bit more in specific examples of what are the potential levers that can be activated and for which we will look for this toolbox. So we define basically 5 steps which have to be clear around who should be in a given study. I think this was mentioned during one of the, subgroups of discussion, that we have to be very specific. It's great to have some indicators that are identified as the most important, but there is a disease specificity that is to be accounted for. What can you do when you design and you have in mind that eventually you want your study to be inclusive? So what exists? What do you do to maybe not ask only the patient to come, but go where the patients are? What can then make the participation less burdensome so that it's not only to enter in the study or to qualify, but to be able to participate and make that easy for people who are included in studies? And then how do you evaluate, monitor, and adapt? So we'll go through a little bit some of the aspects of each of these 5 pillars with examples. So moving to the next slide, the first one, which is what to define who should be in the study. What we are currently working on is, besides the prioritization of the different descriptors that we believe should be by default or should be guided by certain decisions, we also are looking at what is a scientific or societal or ethical methodology to prioritize the different factors. It's pretty clear that we can have a pretty long list, but this list has to be then for a specific given study of a certain size and a certain geographic scope. We cannot run after everything. So this prioritization is a key aspect. Eventually, the clinical trials will be evidence that will feed into clinical guidance recommendations. So how can we make the link also between the evidence generation from clinical trials and the participation, and eventually how this will influence the broader practice. So if we move to the next slide, showing also why it has to be disease specific. If we take a condition like multiple myeloma, and if you look at the epidemiology, very high level, you know that this is higher frequency in men. You also know that there is an age aspect, that it's really a condition that is diagnosed frequently in all the patients. And then you have a component of the origin. People of African descent have a higher likelihood. So for multiple myeloma, what is will be recommended and what is kind of intuitive is that if you are equipped with this access to the relevant data to understand population distribution, that's what you should account for in the trial design, potentially specifying that you want to achieve a certain representation based on the underlying known distribution of these factors. Next slide, please. So the next step is to say, when you design your protocol, how can you look, with really an eye of inclusivity to some of the aspects. And what we more or less see as the three biggest areas of potential is really to work on the inclusion-exclusion criteria, which often are restrictive for good intent, but often replicating the past. To look at the schedule of assessment, which often, again, has a good intent of scientific validity, but are sometimes very burdensome, and also how the trial itself, then the conduct can be modified to be closer to clinical practice, having a more pragmatic approach. So these are some of the dimensions identified at the protocol design lens level. And if we go to the next slide, again, some of the concrete tools that we know exist. There are some systems that exist for scoring different aspects of a protocol, from the design, the study procedure, the patient burden, and so on, so that we can have a quantitative evaluation of that, and then say, we know that some other studies have been conducted with a lighter design, and how can we learn from that? So if we go to the next slide, I can show you just an example, which is the eligibility criteria, and that's the scoring can really help play with different inclusion-exclusion criteria. And then you can see that a given population can be shrinked very simply by half, just simply if you make your eligibility criteria too rigorous. Next slide. So going where the patients are. So here again, there are many measures that can be accounted for. So there is, of course, the study sites which participate in a given study, if it's as a multi-center study, but not only the location, but also how do you account for the environment. And that's where I think the whole approach of READI to leverage the communities when you think about designing, but also when you run your clinical study are critical. The aspect of decentralization and bringing the trial to patients and not the patient who trials, at least partially when you conduct the study, is another aspect. And there are existing systems that enable patient trial matching tools. So it can be both ways. It can be to help patients who identify themselves with a certain condition to identify the trials that correspond to their condition, or it can be for investigators, given their protocol, to identify in some existing electronic systems if there are patients corresponding to these clinical trials. So again, a couple of examples on the next slides that illustrate some of the potential of these tools or methods, and that will then lead to making the recommendation by READI. So this is an example showing how in a given study, which was in the US in patients with diabetes, and they were looking at what were the primary reasons for enrollment, where you are activating certain primary recruitment methods. And electronic health records, as you can see, with a big red square, was actually a much more powerful way to bring patients and enroll patients in the study than physician referral. You can see that this was a large study, 5,000 patients. The intent was to have proper representation with 50% of females, and there was the racial, ethnical aspects, the age, and other aspects in terms of diabetes. And what actually was achieved was not fully meeting the intent, but it was very clear that from a methodology standpoint, leveraging electronic health records was a very important determinant to achieve representation of the population. Next slide. Another example in another condition, and that's where I think this idea to be condition specific is critical. This is about a smoking cessation program. This is also in the US. And here they were looking at some kind of proactive method of reaching out directly to people, or some passive retroactive recruitment, which were just displaying advertisement or having some flyers or newspapers and so on. And for this condition, which was smoking cessation, the evaluation was made that this flyer on public transportation, this word of mouth, and actually fairly cheap ways to make the study known to patients were the most efficient and certainly the most cost effective, because there is always a limitation to what you can do in a given study. So again, having this understanding of what is the effort and what is the return in order to identify the proper candidate who can benefit is an important aspect. Next slide, please. Okay, if we move to the burden to the patients, again, some examples are put at the top of the slide. You can, of course, remove some barriers through financial support or logistical support for patients to make it easier to, come and travel to the study site, for example. It can be also some educational and cultural support. It can be actually bringing some of the clinical trial team to the patient through mobile nursing. So again, we look at a few concrete examples. Next slide. And here, again, I really want to insist on the fact that what seems to be an interesting method has to be evaluated. Mobile nursing is something that you send a nurse to the patient home to do some of the procedures connected to a given clinical study. So it seems, and it is actually very logical, that it would be useful when you have limited mobility, like elderly or pediatric, or when you need to administer the treatment at home and it is possible. And so mobile nursing is something that in my company we've used actually quite a lot. And it has an impact, but it didn't have the impact that was, I don't have any quantitative measures here, but it does not appear to have the biggest impact that we expected. So again, we need to have a certain humility that some great ideas and do not necessarily lead to actually having the impact. Hence the need to really evaluate, measure, and adjust. Moving to the next slide. This is exactly what is also illustrated by this slide, which is around would people prefer to participate if the trial was run at home? And here, this is a study that was done in Europe, asking about the intention to participate and looking at the differences that you can observe in here 3 countries, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands, and asking people if they would be more likely to participate in the trial was in a site or was at home with a certain support or a mix of the two. And interesting to see that you have a different declared intent. If you look at the top line, you see that during the trial baseline in the site, you have some countries where the probability of participation is different. So there are some cultural aspects, but you can see that in the home with video contact at the bottom, there is a very high intention to participate. Now, this is great, but then you need to evaluate if it actually delivers what is expected. That's, I think, the key message that we want to bring forward. Next slide, please, which is that you eventually need to monitor and adapt. This is a complex aspect where we need to evaluate the different measures. It has to be evidence-based, and what looks promising has to be evaluated in order that we have the impact that we expect. So moving to the next slide, which I think is the last one, this is just illustrative of one of the monitoring tools that is used in my company. It's essential to reflect on what we actually achieve so that we can progress and share what is working and what's not working. So this is my last slide. We would like now to open the input with a question that based on what I presented very high level, if you were in your next trial to implement a measure that would allow from these ideas that have very high level shared or your experience, one specific strategy or one tool based on your understanding or your experience that you would consider implementing in your next protocol. Not 10, pick one and share with us why you are convinced that this one will bring value. Low burden of participation, great. Protocol complexity. EHR data, decentralized. Community-based trials. Great, the cloud starts to come together. Community-based trials. I think this is very much, going in the direction that we have, and that was expressed by Salma and Zoe, that understanding what are the patients, what they tell us, what the community tell us, and think about, even if we have a scientific intent, eventually, if we do not make it simple for people who will benefit, it will not have the impact that we expect. So I think this is extremely interesting. What's your feedback? I think that we are very close to the end of the session, so maybe I stop speaking. I want to share everyone for having participated into this feedback.
Thank you, Bruno. So I'm going to hand over to Brio to do the wrap up and the next steps. Thanks, Brio.
Thank you very much, everyone. So just a couple of minutes to wrap up. First of all, I'd like to thank our colleagues at READI, Bruno, Zoe, and Salma for some excellent presentations. It was fascinating learning more about your the like amazing work that's happening at READI, and it really served as a great springboard to the discussions that we had in our breakout room. Certainly. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with DSxE, and aren't necessarily this may be the first time that you're engaging with DSxE as a community, there's lots of ways to get involved. First of all, probably the easiest thing to do is to sign up to our mailing list. So you can do that by scanning the QR code on the screen just now. We will share emails to the mailing list, kind of advertising the events that we have planned. So as Toro mentioned, our next event will be in the fall, where we'll be having an event with message on how to deal with sex and gender in clinical research. If you would like to join our Slack workspace, we have a very, very engaged and active Slack workspace. You just need to kind of type in that Slack website in there, and that'll take you to our Slack workspace that you can join. If you'd like to get involved on a more substantive basis, you can volunteer with us. So DSxE is largely a volunteer-led organization, and we rely on the support of our volunteers. And so if this is an area that you would like to contribute to, and you can spare an hour or two a week, we would love to hear from you. So please get in touch via the website, the email address info@datascienceforhealthequity.com. If you do sign up for our mailing list, we will share a blog or a short report on this event shortly after the session. So please keep an eye out for that. And one last request. If you've engaged with DSxE a fair amount before, we're currently running a community survey, and we'd love to hear from you in terms of how you found your time with DSxE so far. So I've popped the link in the chat. It should only take between 3 and 5 minutes of your time, and so we've got about that much time left until 4 o'clock. So with that, I will leave you all to it. Please do fill in the survey and sign up to our mailing list, and hope to see you at a future event. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.